Hello, everybody. I guess we are recording now. This is going to be the final, well, or semi penultimate episode in a little series of videos I've been doing with some friends. Basically, starting, I think last year, a couple friends and I have been getting together over Zoom and watching some movies, doing some drinking games. We're all big movie fans, and having known each other for a couple years, we decided to talk about, hey, what are our favorite movies, and kind of go through the initial list and really it just kind of started as a general suggestion and I like, hey, what are your favorite movies, and started as a top 25 and slowly grew to a top 50. So yeah, everybody kind of got together and talked about it, and we shared a bunch, and we're kind of holding off for ultimate top fives, and everybody else has gone through a list. I might even make a little separate playlist and certainly go back and check other people's lists out. But finally, going to do mine, I guess, solo, just because really couldn't determine exactly what schedules were going to be like. But that's fine. I'm sure I could probably talk a fair amount by myself about my favorite movies. But anyway, if anybody's interested, we'll begin here. And I've got my little document, and I'll just go from there. Well, my first video, well, you can see how in the groove that I am. I'll get there. My first favorite film, number 50, is Mulan, the 1998 Disney film, Disney animated version. I did not see the remake and did not really have an interest in it. Heard very mixed things about that one. But I really didn't feel a need to, because I thought that the original film just was so great. I mean, what is there really to say about Mulan? Something, I guess, because you're watching or listening to this thing. Well, Mulan, I think, is just a clearly one of my favorite Disney movies, and probably not the only one on the list here tonight. Or today, spoilers. You can look forward to that. But Mulan just has a really great animation. I find that, to give you a hint, a lot of my favorite Disney movies were kind of obviously from the Disney Renaissance, which was kind of the perfect age that I was sort of growing up in. Though oddly, most of my favorite Disney movies are kind of from the latter part of the Renaissance, when they started to get a little more experimental. I mean, you've got your, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King, Little Mermaid. That's kind of like the four core of the beginning of the Renaissance, and they still had a lot of strong movies in the late '90s, but they weren't quite as big hits. They had some detractors, but I like that period because that's kind of when Disney maybe felt like they could do no wrong, and they took some risks, and maybe they had some slight misfires, but in some ways I think that had some of the most interesting and still best work. And Mulan is another example of that. I mean, the animation was really good. I always liked the kind of attention to detail for the ancient kind of old Chinese culture. I liked that everything was kind of in that sort of design, bringing about elements of the calligraphy and just Chinese sort of sounding music with the sound design, and little bits of the architecture and landscape. And also, really, I enjoyed a lot of the songs. I mean, let's make a man out of you, and the one where she talks about herself and the reflection. What does my reflection show inside? I think it was just a really great, inspiring hero, a strong female character for young girls, and really for any viewer, that I always thought was really good. It was really awesome to see that. I really liked the vocal performance from that voice actress. She does a really good job with the portrayal of this young person who is really kind of coming into her own. So it's a good coming of age story, but there's a lot of good action, and there's some interesting ideas about the gender roles, and how you can't make assumptions about things like that. So I thought that was a really good message, in addition to just having a lot of good action and really wonderful animation. I like, of course, Eddie Murphy's Mushu is probably my favorite of his animated characters. I always thought his jokes were pretty funny, as one of the Disney celebrities at the time. And I also really liked the villains, the Huns, the Mongol invaders. It's kind of like, it's one of those funny things where everyone always jokes about how dark Disney is, but really, having gone back and watched a lot of these old Disney movies with Dan over on his channel, he realized like that consistency of being really dark somehow is something that Disney's always kind of danced around really well in the most G or PG way possible. But the 90s is where it started to get really kind of blatant with things they started to show. Like, obviously, it's about a war, and there's a lot of death that isn't really outright seen, but heavily implied. I mean, you can certainly make assumptions. I mean, and Mulan has one of the best kills when she, shoots the rocket and causes that major avalanche, kills a whole army of bad guys. Usually Disney villains go out pretty intensely, but I think it's Shan Yu, the Hun leader. I know he's not exactly the most three-dimensional Disney villain, but he's one of the scariest, one of the most intimidating. And I like how they almost make him sort of demonic looking with his glowing eyes. It's he's really intimidating too. So a lot of that stuff's very memorable. I think it's a good message and it flows very well. Yeah, so that's my number 50. Mulan's great. Check it out if you haven't seen it. Number 49 was one that I went back and forth as to whether or not I was going to put this on the list. And even going through here, I had a bunch of other movies that didn't make the cut. And a lot of the stuff is based around things that I had seen a little more recently. I kind of wanted to go back through and watch them. So kind of felt like I looked at this list and said, it still seems okay for now. But anyway, because of a certain other film that came out a couple years ago from the recording of this video, I've often said that it might have kind of almost ruined the movie for me. But as of right now, I'm still saying that 49 is Unbreakable from 2000, M. Night Shyamalan's second big movie following The Sixth Sense. And I mean, Unbreakable really is probably would have been higher up, but it's gone a bit down. And I think that Glass did kind of alter my feelings about the film a little bit. But Unbreakable, I think, is really Shyamalan's best work in terms of a lot of the best direction and cinematography and pacing here, and really one of his better stories, just from a plot perspective and a character perspective. But I think a lot of the slow building atmosphere with a lot of the slow design and the long shots, and his, of course, use of contrasting color, identifying the hero and the villain and what we're associated with and how certain things are framed like comic book panels, and the structure of the story is very similar, of course, to the standard superhero origin. And of course, for those people that know me and have followed my channel, you know that I'm a big fan of comic books, particularly superheroes and superhero comics. So Unbreakable, though, was a movie that I watched younger, and it was kind of before the big comic book boom. It was right around the time X-Men came out, and of course, well before the MCU and all that stuff, before superhero movies really were the mainstream, most popular thing. So this was a little bit ahead of its time and playing with some of those tropes. And it was really kind of an experimental breakdown, and not so much not a total subversion or kind of deconstruction of superheroes, but more of a kind of looking at it from a different lens. I guess there's some of that too, but really just kind of an exploration of a man kind of really just trying to find his place and feeling very lost. And I think it's one of Bruce Willis's best performances. Of course, it's one of the more quiet, stoic performances, but he does a really good job. And it's also got this amazing score, really heightens things up when he kind of, has his incredible moments. And of course, when there's those elements, particularly with Mr. Glass's background, when he's kind of suffering as a kid, or when he's going through his moments of loneliness in the hospital after his breakings and things like that. So there's a really good soundtrack that really heightens all the emotional elements in the film, which I love. And of course, I really think it's also one of Samuel Jackson's best performances too, as Mr. Glass. I think that kind of more vulnerable, quiet, really sympathetic villain, but still very menacing. And I think it's a very good twist. I mean, the only thing I don't like about the movie is the weird freeze frame thing at the end, which is kind of like this rushed, almost like make you think like it's based on a true story. It's like, it's a little weird, but that minor thing aside, I think it's a great movie. I think it's just a really good, interesting take on superheroes. It's a little more gritty, a little more realistic, but I really love it. I think that it's an interesting fusion of the super strength, but also the weakness to water. He's got the psychic abilities where he can kind of sort of see what people are potentially going to do that might be wrong. And I like the contrast between Mr. Glass and was the Green Guardian that he eventually becomes. Bruce Willis's character, how they're kind of one end on the spectrum and the other. And I think it's a very heartbreaking kind of twist. If you haven't seen it, it always gets me. It's like, ooh. But it might seem a little pretentious in retrospect. Like Shyamalan probably comes off as being like, yes, I see that superheroes are really this this element of legends that are kind of there, and this idea of hope of great things we can do that might be hidden based on myth. But hey, I think there might be something to it. I still think it's an interesting idea, but yeah. The sequel aside, I think that Unbreakable is still a very good movie and still sits pretty high up there, but who knows? Number 48 is Hero from 1992, not the Jet Li version, which I need to watch again. But no, this one is the one with Dustin Hoffman, Gina Davis, and the great Andy Garcia, as we often joke. Really, this one is kind of one of ones that might be a little lesser known for people. It's kind of a sort of offbeat comedy slash drama. Basically, it's about this guy who's kind of like sort of a low level criminal type, kind of a low life con man sort of guy, kind of down on his luck. Dustin Hoffman plays this guy that won't stick his neck out for anybody. He's kind of portrayed like that guy, and he is driving home, and I think his car dies, and there's this plane that crashes like right in front of him, and his good nature kind of comes up, and he sort of shows the best part of himself, goes into this burning plane and rescues all these passengers pretty much single-handedly, but his face is all covered in soot and mud because it was raining, so nobody really knows who it is. And then there's this reporter that he saved that was on the plane that says, hey, this could be a good story. There's going to be a reward. Come forward. We want to learn who you are, this great person who did this selfless act. And of course, because there's a reward about it that's become available, Dustin Hoffman, Bernie LaPlante is his character. Bernie wants to go and say, of course I'm going to do that. But his shoe is left behind. And it's sort of like a reverse Cinderella sort of thing where, hey, come fit the shoe on and we'll see if the shoe fits and you're the hero. But then there's this guy who I think is basically a homeless guy, John Bubber, Andy Garcia, goes and meets Gina Davis and says, hey, because he had previously talked to Bernie LaPlante, and I guess offhand he had kind of confessed, I don't want the celebrity, people bothering me, don't stick your neck out, that sort of thing. But so Andy Garcia said, I'll go ahead and take it because he's down on his luck too. And all these different events kind of continue to go along, and Bernie can't really get through to anybody that he's the actual hero, and he starts having problems with his wife and his kid and his court date because he's about to go to jail for like stolen goods related issues or something. So there's this mistaken identity, but the ironic thing is the guy that's lying and is creating this facade is actually a really good person and is the typical ideal hero, and he becomes the celebrity, and he's kind of put on this pedestal, and he goes around, talking to kids in hospitals, doing these charity events, and he actually is the great Andy Garcia. He's a really good guy, but that's kind of what the film's about, is sort of the idea of heroism, and there's a lot of commentary about the media and how they blow things out of proportion, and how we sort of have different expectations of who people are based on first impressions or assumptions, but people have a lot of good traits that we might not necessarily assume, or people that are good might not always, be telling the whole truth. So it's kind of a more innocent look at the complications of people and their portrayals just in society and what we assume about the idea of what a hero is and the type of heroes we can all be if we step up. It's a really good movie, and I didn't know this until recently, but apparently the movie is kind of supposed to be done in that old Hollywood style. Like it's this sort of feel-good, quirky kind of story that would have been more common in films in the 30s or 40s. So it's kind of a throwback to those sort of movies, which I didn't realize, but it kind of does have that sort of a quirky, lighthearted element to it. But there's kind of this interesting development where John Bubber actually feels so guilty and feels like he's a fraud, and he and Bernie have to be reunited in a pretty good final act there. I also really love the one cameraman because he's really over the top, and he's all like, man, that shot was so great, the balls of fire, the humanity. It's like this guy's just really into it. So it was kind of like, I don't know, it was probably somebody shot at a really enthusiastic cinematographer or something. But yeah, there's a lot of good lines. I like the Bernie character, the kind of guy who's sort of little cynical and has a lot of jabs that he kind of makes at people when he's really grumpy or angry, which I feel like I do sometimes. It's like a sort of side of me that I don't always show, but he's a good guy too. So good movie. I think it's a bit underrated, but yeah, check it out if you haven't seen it. I guess I'll do little synopses if I think people haven't seen these things. Number 47 is Phantasm, 1979. Phantasm is, excuse me, Phantasm is probably of all the like sort of slasher creature feature series of films of horror movies. I think the Phantasm series is my favorite because, at least of the initial movies, and granted, there are less of them than there would be like a Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street or something. But there's so few movies that I didn't feel like it ever really wore out its welcome, and I really liked a lot of the sequels, and I can't say that for a lot of movies like that. And also, if you know me and my interest in film, particularly in sci-fi and horror, it's a film that's very me because it's very weird. There's a lot of weird ambience. I really like the electronic synth soundtrack, and there's also kind of almost an old school horror feel to it. Like the Phantasm seems like it could be a sort of the next level of those classic Universal monsters, but there's a lot of surreal dreamlike imagery because he's like this he's like this weird undertaker guy, but he's actually like a monster or alien from another dimension, and he's like turning people's cadavers into weird mutants to mine on some other weird planet or something. And of course you've got the iconic spheres of death that drill into people's heads. It's just a very unique weird monster slash weapon you just don't see. And it's kind of that unique blend of, it's a little cheesy, but I'm still really impressed by the effects, and it's got a really creepy vibe to it. I think that the first movie just holds up really well, and of course it's kind of like with the tall man himself, you're sort of almost like this young boy is kind of dealing with his fears about death and I guess the unknown, and this older man, of course, is the Undertaker. It's a kind of a classic symbol, but Phantasm is just very me for horror, and I love it. I kind of want to really like it. Still have to watch the last one because I've heard mixed things about it since then. But I was planning to go through and watch them all with some friends, so hopefully that happens again. But first one, still love it. Number 46 is The Count of Monte Cristo, the 2002 version. I think really, I don't know, in terms of just period pieces, I mean, this one's got a lot of the swashbuckling elements. It's got some intrigue, some double-crossing betrayal, some romance. Of course, I love the costume design and a lot of the elaborate sets and whatnot. A lot of the cool landscapes of Europe. I think it's like France and Spain, Italy. And I really like Jim Caviezel's performance. I think this is his best performance. This was kind of the movie that really kind of got me interested in him as an actor. I think he does a really good job. And really, you might see this as a theme on the list too. I just really like revenge stories. I think that's one of my favorite genres or subgenres of thrillers, adventures. I like a good revenge story, catharsis, just to kind of see somebody sort of get taken down and kind of go and get back at the people that betrayed him, and get back at the bad guys. I always enjoy that sort of adventure, and this movie's fun. I confess, I have not read the original novel, though I need to. I did see the anime version of this, which I also thought was very good. Obviously deviates a little bit, I think, from the novel and this version, but cool visuals on that one too. But this one is kind of, from what I understand, kind of a very streamlined, slimmed down version that focuses a lot more, of course, on the action elements of the story, which makes sense if you've got to kind of Hollywoodize it. But I really liked it. I like a lot of the swashbuckling. I think Guy Pearce is a good villain here as well. You've got Luis Guzman in one of his, I think, understated performances as the Count's sort of sidekick. And there's also I forget the guy's name, but the guy that played Dumbledore in the first couple Harry Potter movies plays the prisoner that he meets when he's actually in the prison at Chateau d'If, and kind of teaches him about philosophy and history, and kind of helps him sort of become more of a gentleman and help him plan his escape. So that's got some of my best sequences there. And I think it's a good revenge story, but it's also kind of a story about forgiveness, which I think is pretty powerful too, because he kind of has to sort of not lump everybody into the same category. Mostly the woman that he was in love with, conveniently, but you also see a young Henry Cavill here, who I didn't realize. I was like, oh, baby Superman's in this movie. So, yeah, if you like period pieces, swashbuckling adventures, and Revenge. I think there's some good performances here, very theatrical, but very fun. Good stuff. Number 45 is a classic. Got the chance to rewatch it recently, so I kind of realized how good it really was and how much it definitely has to be on my list. It is the original, real deal Planet of the Apes, the 1968 classic written by Rod Serling. Didn't know that. From the Twilight Zone fame, and makes a lot of sense. I talked about this a lot at length with my friend Dan a little while ago. You can check that out on the channel. But basically, this is one of my favorite sci-fis. I think it's got some great commentary just about prejudice and about just kind of a fun reverse sort of thing, and also cautionary tale about war and violence in a weird way. If you don't know the ending, some really great plastic, well, not plastic, maybe some plastic, but some great practical effects, great costume, makeup, design on the apes themselves, great performances. Probably my favorite Charlton Heston movie, except for his performance. I also do really like Ben-Hur, but this one's a little shorter, I guess. But also just really good stuff. Great soundtrack too. You can check out previous video I did with Dan back if you want to, but won't spend a lot of time with the apes. But great movie, love it. Number 44 is Prince of Egypt, 1998. I feel like that's a popular year for me so far. Yeah, just a great year for movies, I guess. Yeah, Prince of Egypt, just a really great kind of epic, biblical kind of story, animated musical from DreamWorks. One of my favorites from my family growing up. This is one we like to watch. We always kind of like Mulan as well, just sort of kind of going back to that kind of wholesome story about family, also kind of finding your place and kind of going through the struggle to kind of take part in something greater and help other people. I really was sort of drawn to. I like the contrast of this film because I just think it's a great epic story that clearly, has had some long-reaching connections to people over time. One reason it's endured so much, and I think with this particular version, I love the contrast of how grounded the themes are of brotherhood. Like I really like the connection between Moses and Ramesses, the contrast of how that really their difficulties and their sort of jealousy and envy and their separation and kind of frustration about their joining again with their divisions between the people that they're representing. I love that dynamic, and it just feels so genuine, and it really does feel like there is that complication, like there is this really strong connection between these people, and they really do love each other, but their duty towards their people is and what they need to do is sort of separating them and bringing them into conflict. And I think that the voice performances are really great here. You got a stellar cast of people. I mean, I think Val Kilmer does a great job as Moses, and I think it's Ralph Fiennes is Ramesses, and you got a lot of people in here. You got Jeff Goldblum, Sandra Bullock, Patrick Stewart was in here. I think you got the duo of Steve Martin and Martin Short are in there, and of course you just got some fantastic songs. You got this epic scope of things, beautiful music. You really feel the pain that a lot of these people are going through and the moments of triumph. And I just love even the once again, I'm going to bring up sound design because it's just something I didn't appreciate as much as when I was a kid, but I've gotten a lot more into audio. And I love when, like in that opening scene, the stone pillars, when they're working on the pyramids and the temples, they kind of crash down to the ground and the dust goes up, and just the fine detail. You almost can feel the sand and the heat, and it's just like I just love it. It really feels like this epic, sweeping, almost timeless tale. It feels like a long time ago, but once again, really amazing design. I think in terms of animation, one of the best 2D animated things I've ever seen. Still holds up. It's whenever I think about, like, I wish they did more of that traditional animation. Prince of Egypt's like one I would go back to. Just think it's a great story, and it's really well put together. I love it. Love it all. Number 43 is Apocalypto, 2006. I believe it was a Mel Gibson film. Yes, one of the ones that is in a different language entirely. Oddly enough, another one that I watched a lot with my family. This was kind of one of our big, intense action movies. We'd all sort of sit down and really get invested in. It's just that, once again, kind of a basic, guy gets separated from his family, and you really care about these people, and then of course see their village get destroyed, and he's sold into slavery. And it's really just about a guy trying to get back to his family, and it's like, something that's, what, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but it's something that I think a lot of people can relate to. Really, it's another one that I think it's a combination of just that basic story, and how well the performances really shine, despite the fact it's in another language. I forget if it's like Mayan or something, and how much of that is still conveyed. So in a weird way, it's actually one of my favorite foreign language films, even though I think it's still American. I love the combination of the landscapes. Like, the jungle feels so dense and humid, and they really take advantage of a lot of the visuals there, and there's a lot of haunting elements of almost the supernatural elements of ideas of destiny and foreboding prophecy that are sort of hinted at. And I just love, man, the villains of this movie are so great. But they're also kind of humanized too, because there are guys that have been sent out to just raid villages and make slaves out of people, but they're also doing it because from their perspective it's to appease their king, appease their gods, and it's part of their tradition. So it seems horrifying to us and to the villagers, but to these guys, they've just sort of dehumanized this other tribe, and they just think it's the way it is. And man, how visceral and dirty and just unclean, and like some of the disturbing gore in this film, especially when they get to the city. The contrast between that and the simple village really just does a lot to show the difference between the two different civilizations. Also, just some really great action as well. And I just really like the history of it. I find interesting as well, because it's kind of about the Americas, and I always found it interesting how this movie could have easily gotten a sequel, because it's set in this time that, at least growing up, you kind of go over a little bit, but they don't talk a lot about the native cultures in more like Central and South America. And I love how the end of the film sort of implies the beginning of the first explorers with the conquistadors, and how it's like it's just going to be worse for everybody. So it's almost like an interesting contrast there as well, foreboding that sort of out of the frying pan into the fire kind of situation. But just really good makeup and stunts, and excellent everything here. I mean, really, from a technical perspective, I just love the epic adventure of this movie that is so intense. So very, very R-rated, but you really want to see the hero succeed. He's a good guy. Really feel for these characters, and there's a lot of raw emotion there. It feels very raw and natural and primal almost. But number 42, switching gears a little bit, there's going to be some massive shifts in tone here in this list. Seems to be common. But number 42 is The Iron Giant from 1999. Wow. Just a really wonderful family film. Also kind of hints a little bit at history. Has a lot in common with another movie I really like called October Sky, which, minus the Iron Giant elements, has a lot to deal with, kind of small town, dealing with the Cold War and Sputnik being launched. And I don't know, I've always found it interesting that they take place like the same year, same sort of themes. They're maybe almost same universe, but excuse me. The Iron Giant, is another one. Grew up watching when I was a kid, and really liked the giant character. It's obviously got some sci-fi fantasy elements, but there was a kid growing up that was kind of relatable. Growing up with, I guess he had a single mom taking care of him, and I just feel like anybody kind of going off into the woods and sort of imagining, kind of an imaginary friend or having adventures in their mind of some character that they could relate to. Maybe that was something that I was connected to, but I just really like the simple bond between the boy and the giant, kind of, boy and his dog, boy and his creature kind of story that, of course, is kind of a common trope. It's almost sort of Spielberg-esque, but very wholesome. There's just a lot of that, but I also really like a lot of the other characters in the movie besides Hogarth and the giant. I mean, I really like the beatnik hipster guy and his art junkyard. He's really cool character. I love him, and I love. I think it's Oh my! It's a Jennifer Aniston is the mom, which I didn't pick up on 2 years later. I think she's very relatable as a mom, kind of struggling to make it, and I think her relationship with the son is very believable. And I love Mansley, the secret agent that's right. And I find myself kind of switching back and forth because he seems like he could be kind of incompetent. Like he messes with this kid, and the kid's kind of his arch enemy. It can get one over him, and he seems kind of like this. Sort of a bastard that really does, you know, kind of take some actions that seem a little ridiculous, but at the same time, he's really, I have a feeling he really sort of captures that Cold War paranoia that makes you sort of afraid of everyone, which I think was just very common at the time with the nuclear age just kind of being at its height. And obviously, there's still some elements of that are still left over today. We still deal with just fear of the other, fear of the unknown, but you've got the purity of the child, being open and kind of, seeing there might be some sort of misunderstanding and being able to connect with this other being that may have been designed, or at least with the intention of defending itself, and really just clicking into that sort of mode with very little provocation, but that communication manages to break through, which I think is another theme that I liked growing up and has been relevant throughout my life and the movies I like and just in general. So the bond with the two is really great. Also, the design of the giant's great. Vin Diesel, one of his great performances. I mean, who knew? I didn't know that for a long time. Just very simple, but a lot of emotion with very few lines. Iron Giant is, of course, one of the greatest Superman movies, if not the greatest. You are who you choose to be. What a great message. Superman. Could be a Tomo or Superman. We all have that choice. So a powerful message there. Very sad. Still think the ending should have gone a different direction because kids could handle it. Most people were like, Joe, what are you talking about? Don't want to make the kids cry. Well, I mean, I guess it's fine, but I don't know. I just think they pulled back a little. I think that, okay, I won't spoil it if you haven't seen it, but it's just me. Of course, my thoughts on Toy Story 3, so maybe don't listen to me. Anyway, number 41 is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, 1990. Best Turtles movie, hands down. I've talked about this on my channel before. This is one of those ones that kind of surprises me, though, because I think, is this really one of my favorite movies still? I have a lot of good memories with the Turtles. It's just one of those, IPs, one of those franchises growing up that I really was into. Though ironically, I feel like I was only really a Turtle fan hardcore for maybe a couple of years. I watched some of the reruns of the old show from the 80s and 90s, mostly on VHS. I had my action figures and coloring books. Didn't really play too many of the games or read any of the original comics, and a lot of the other films and shows and everything that have come out since then, for me, nothing has matched this movie. And I really just think it's one of those weird things that it's much like the Turtles themselves. The film just doesn't seem like it should work, but I just think that it's that really great balance of they knew they were doing something kind of ridiculous and they leaned into it just enough, but they also took it very seriously. They took the characters seriously in their performances. They seem like teenagers, very, very 80s, early 90s. The whole movie feels kind of like a time capsule, but at the same time, though, it's like as goofy as the actual premise is, and the characters themselves kind of have their one-liners and their humor, and there's some of that left over from the comics. From the 80s show. For the most part, it actually seems like it is very, very truthful to those old comics, which are actually very serious, which ironically was kind of a satire of Daredevil. So it's actually kind of a fairly serious and at times kind of dark movie. I mean, there's a lot of fighting, violence, but there's obviously some great themes about fatherhood and brotherhood and family and friendship, also about revenge and personal history and letting go. The whole theme about fatherhood is kind of, as you get older, not very subtle, but it's interesting how it's like you've got the Turtles dealing with their relationship with each other and their growing up and their relationship to their father figure and his relationship to his father who was killed. And then you've got Shredder taking in all the boys who feel like they don't fit in, much like the Turtles who feel like they're outcasts. And they're kind of gravitating to somebody that makes them feel like they belong, but he's manipulating these young teens because he's sort of an evil father figure. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of good writing there, and really just of course you've got the Henson guys doing some really good costuming. It holds up really well. Some good action. It's just always impressive to me that they're able to have those fights and stunts in those bulky suits and pull it off. Of course, you've got some great music. You've got Casey Jones is great. Some great one-liners. Really awesome soundtrack and costumes. Just really a very well put together film. I love it. Still holds up for me. Very nostalgic, but I think it's a pretty good movie on its own as well. Yeah, so number 40. It's been a while since we've had a straightforward superhero film, and this one kind of surprised me in retrospect, but 1978's Superman, the first Superman. Yeah, believe it or not, Superman is not like one of my, I mean, he's probably up there for me, but he's never when I think of like my top 5, or I'm not even sure if he'd be in my top 10 favorite superheroes, but there's something about this movie that just feels so perfect as just a superhero film, as a superhero origin movie. Even though it takes some liberties from the comics and changes some things, it feels so purely Superman, and it's very uplifting, feel good, well constructed. It's a little cheesy at points, but Christopher Reeve does an excellent job as Superman. And he does, for me. I think he's definitely the best live action Superman thus far. I feel like he's had a lot of imitators, or at least one or two. And the costume looks good. There's a lot of fun. Just sort of that like I said, it's just sort of uplifting, and it's one you can kind of go back to. And I think it just has that strong sort of oddly kind of an everyman feel, but it also feels very old school, kind of an echo of old comic book sensibilities. And I like his relationship with Lois Lane. It seems very kind of innocent, but fun. Also, the I don't know, just the Lex Luthor's plan just seems very like Silver Age, Golden Age, ridiculous. And I kind of like that, even though he's not my favorite version of Lex Luthor. There's something about Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor that I I always enjoyed, because he's so ridiculous, and he's goofy, but he's also sort of unrepentantly evil. Like he has no real as evil as the Clancy Brown animated Lex Luthor is, who's I think the best. Even though he's very evil, I think that he's actually so well rounded that he might be more sympathetic in some ways. This Lex Luthor is just, no, I want to kill a bunch of people by stealing nuclear missiles to get more money and name it after myself. Like, it's just ridiculous, but it seems very comic booky and pure in a way, which I kind of miss when everything could be a little bit more cryptic now. So I don't know. I find it to be fun, even when Superman does the classic, going back to change the rotation of the Earth. That's ridiculous, but I don't know. It fits the movie very well, and I think that the emotion of him kind of losing his father early on adds a certain amount of, like, as powerful as he is, even Superman has his limits, and still kind of like his is driven later on to learn from that by his love for Lois Lane. So I also really think that Lex Luthor has one of my favorite lines in the movie, and it's my favorite Lex Luthor line, where he's kind of talking to Superman at a different wavelength. I think it's the frequency that only dogs can hear or something, and he's like, kind of beckoning him to come find him. And he's like, there's a strong sense of good in you, Superman. Yeah, but then again, nobody's perfect. Well, almost nobody, because I love that contrast. Like, Lex Luthor just sees that Superman's goodness and the fact that he cares about other people is his greatest weakness. It's just a great contrast between the two people. I love that sort of dichotomy. But yeah, Superman 78. Superman 2 is really good. I have not actually seen the Richard Donner cuts, so I'm sure if I did, that might change my mind. To be fair, it's a close up, but I always just I like the simplicity of the first movie. Switching it up a little bit, number 39 is the only Akira Kurosawa movie on my list, because there's a few big ones I haven't seen, and I have to probably rewatch some of the other ones again. But I've always been drawn to Ron from 1985. This is probably one of the more kind of classic, really, really well-received critical films, and kind of the classic film historians. So I think the the first foreign film I've mentioned too. I like Kurosawa's movies. I think I've seen, as of this recording, I've seen Yojimbo, Seven Samurai, and I saw High and Low, and I think I want to say I've seen another one at some point, but I'm drawing a blank now. Maybe one of his other samurai pictures. But Ron, it's another sort of Shakespearean telling. I believe it's of King Lear, and with Ron, it's just kind of like classic Kurosawa, but I just love his. It's one of the first ones on the list that I think I because when I'm going through the list, I mean, I realized I was loving films for different reasons. Like some of them are obviously kind of personal connections with certain things about the characters or the themes that I really relate to, that I connect with. Other ones are just great experiences I've sort of had nostalgically watching with people, or just in general, like it got a really emotional response out of me that I remember and come back to, or just something that I really admire for the filmmaking techniques and makes me sort of just admire movies and inspires me to be creative myself. And Ron is one of the first ones that did that, at least on this list so far, because it just I love Kurosawa's shots. Like he's got like the long standard shots just to show the landscape, and we'll show all these people just kind of static, but in these brilliant costumes. A lot of long, quiet scenes where we can kind of take in the landscape, and we find the perfect framed beauty of the shot and just sit with it in the quiet for a while, in the natural atmosphere and the beauty of nature. And there's a lot of dialogue heavy stuff, and there's also this sort of theatrical, old-fashioned portrayal of all the different characters as they're acting. So I kind of like that. I like the sort of fall from grace of the old man that kind of loses everything. I've always been sort of drawn to that, sort of reflecting on his life, and he feels kind of betrayed by his sons. And there's also kind of I like how he sort of bonds with the fool and wanders the landscape, and he kind of goes mad, but he sort of kind of gains more, and he goes through this transformation as he's sort of broken down, which I find very interesting. I just love the war, the battle. It feels very operatic, but also at the same time very legitimate. You've got all these samurai on horseback and arrows flying, and then the castle's burning. Just feels very elevated, and I love the theatricality. I love the score of it. Also, to be completely honest, I think it's one of the few Kurosawa movies that I saw in color. And even though I've seen some of the other ones that are black and white, and I like a black and white film, there might be a few on the list coming up. In fact, there are. I don't know. There's something about just getting to see the brilliant costumes and sets and just the landscape and the beauty of it, that it's just very colorful, and I just love the look of the film. So yeah, even Ron himself is the main character. Just for even he looks very vibrant. So I don't know. I think it's maybe not the best Kurosawa movie, but it's the one that I think definitely stood out the most to me stylistically, and I really connected with it. I want to watch it again. So Ron's really good. Number 38 is a black and white movie that I haven't watched in a while, but I need to go back to. And I kind of want to do another side video about it because it was very weird, the initial viewing of it. But that is 1998's Pi. And the reason why I put this on here is because I'm a big Darren Aronofsky movie. I feel like, once again, like some people making their lists, I kind of wanted to sort of also, some of the movies on here kind of represent me and my love of certain films, and through me, my film preferences. And Darren Aronofsky is one of my favorite film directors because I think he also has this very surrealist, experimental, avant-garde sort of style that I like with a lot of my directors, but it's also very fluid, very crisp, and also makes these films that sometimes they're a little out there with their visuals and their ideas, but they often seem to really connect with a lot of people. Like he really gets that stuff out more into the mainstream than I think any other director that kind of plays with those sort of styles. So I always admired that. But his first movie is probably still my favorite because it's sort of like that more grounded, low budget indie kind of film, and it's playing with big concepts, but in a very grounded sort of way. It's got only a couple characters, very dialogue heavy, very atmosphere heavy. You've got a lot of over the shoulder camcorder sort of guerrilla style filming, black and white. The soundtrack is really just one piece of music that they kind of break up and divide. The very industrial do do do. I remember the DVD actually came with a music video that was that with a bunch of like ads running around. And for those that haven't heard, it's basically a film about this kind of lone reclusive mathematician guy living in Brooklyn, and he's got this giant, old school computer that's just computing things, and he's trying to find the sort of the code, the secret number, that will sort of be connected to everything in nature and obviously have a lot of ramifications in science and in society and religion. And he thinks he somehow finds this number that might essentially be an equation that sort of connects everything, and it's in relation to just different ideas. And it's interesting because he thinks he finds this thing, and then it turns out to be this conspiracy where you've got different people sort of intimidating him and following him and coming after him and maybe threatening his life. And he sort of starts to kind of lose it and becomes very paranoid of people in his life, and maybe starts to hallucinate and not really sure, what's going on. There's some pretty intense sort of nightmare sequences that are very clearly like Lynchian in their inspiration. One very visceral one involving a brain, I think. But yeah, there's some people coming after him that might. There's one group that's after him because they're like corporate executives or something that want to see if they can crack the stock market using his formula, if they could find out what the code is so they could gain wealth, or prevent people from figuring out the secret so they can lose their control of the economy because they might be the upper echelon or something. There's also some individuals that are interested in Jewish mysticism that are going after him, that believe they need to have it because it's theirs for religious purposes. So he can't really trust in everybody. Everybody's kind of going after him. So it's just a really intense sort of film that I feel like I was attracted to just for the ideas and the style. I think it was one of those movies I watched in high school that was very me, kind of getting more into more independent movies and looking at things from a more artistic perspective when I was really starting to get into film for film's sake. And I actually remember I had one of my summers, I think when I was 16, I remember I think I was alone for the weekend because everybody had gone out of town, and I decided to stay behind. And it was nice because, I had like, a simple time. I had like $20 and I went out, like got some pizza nearby, and I walked up to my Hollywood Video, which is a couple miles away. And sometimes I do that, and I just went up there and I rented two movies. I rented this and the 1986 Transformers film, which was my double that night. I want to recreate that double because it was very strange, but two very good movies. So that's the history of that. So always liked Pi just for that. And it's a film that I feel like if there was a type of style I'd want to emulate, just kind of directing something, I think that Pi would probably be in that line. Aronofsky and Nicholas Winding Refn as well kind of is one of my inspirations as well. But I've got a lot of those. Just it felt like a very me movie, at least something that I would have tried to have done like 10, 15 years ago, if not now. But yeah, that's Pi. Check it out if you want to be creeped out and confused. Yes, that leads to number 37, which is another black and white film, though admittedly another one that's a bit more straightforward, perhaps. But also very me. That is The Day the Earth Stood Still, which I also did a video on back then, 1951. Very old, very classic science fiction. I mean, to me, this is like, when I think of science fiction, like old school golden age movies, you got the big bulky robots and guys in and big ray guns, and everybody's got like the knobs and dials, but everybody still has the big 50s. Women have the big 50s and 60s wigs and hair, and it's that's this is one of the great kind of visual representations of that, but also thematic ones. It's kind of amazing to me how old this movie is, because a lot of films like this, I think, especially of this ilk, a lot of sci-fi movies in the 50s and 60s were B movies. They were very low budget. Even if they were high concept, they were very cheesy. Usually the acting and writing wasn't that great, and they were kind of just, you put them on in the drive-in as like a second billing, hence B movie. But I've always kind of loved a lot of that stuff, even the cheesy practical effects, even if it's really fake. I always like the down and dirty inspiration of a lot of these young filmmakers, just trying to get the vision out there, and a lot of the creativity that goes into some of those effects, even if they're cheesy. And I inspire the gusto of like, just because you don't have a big budget doesn't mean you can't make a movie. And sometimes you get some fun ones. And this is one of the rare ones where back then it was a sci-fi movie that took itself very seriously. And of course, you've got the big robot, you've got the flying saucers, you've got Gort and Klaatu. But I really love that just old school sci-fi idea where it's kind of cheesy initially, but it's actually a very serious film. Kind of about a man just kind of from another world examining humanity and kind of determining, are we too dangerous, or are we willing to kind of take those next steps if we do kind of get out there and explore the galaxy, explore the universe, and what will we encounter, and have we overcome our violent tendencies towards each other to kind of reach towards better goals, better ambitions. So I really like that idea. It's not a very particularly violent movie, and but the effects are still pretty great for as simple as they are. I think it's pretty cool, the ray gun effects of how when Gort disintegrates the guns and the tanks. I love the Klaatu character. He seems kind of otherworldly in his stoic delivery, but he's very likable, and I love that very passive demonstration of power when he just turns off all the electronics in the world. And that was the big heavy action moment, really. But you've also got some of the cheesy woman going when the big robot takes her and he's carrying her and she's fainted. That's just iconic image right up there with like Forbidden Planet and stuff like that. So yeah, I just loved this movie, connected to it a lot as a kid. One of those classics that my parents showed me and quote to each other all the time. I don't know, I like a lot of the characters, they're fun. Just a good old-fashioned science fiction movie that I think holds up really well. Never saw the remake and didn't have an idea for any desire to, but maybe I'll see it at some point. Let's see. I think. Oh well. I'm gonna say here. Yeah. Let's look at the place for it. Number 36 is going to be Drive. Actually, Nicholas Winding Refn's Drive. This is another movie that I'll admit I had missed initially on my list when I was talking about it, and then I think Peter brought it up, and I was like, Drive. Like, yeah, I love that movie. Just this is another one that I think it's one of the best crime thrillers because I love a good crime thriller. There's a joke going on among some of my friends that, hey, if it's got the mafia, it's got gangsters, of course. Joe likes it because I just like a lot of gangster movies, though this one's more, not necessarily, I mean, there's organized crime elements, but it's more of about this getaway driver who kind of works for the mob, kind of being a driver for getaways, for robberies and things like that, in addition to being a stunt driver. So there's kind of almost like a Hollywood element, kind of neo-noir aspect, which I kind of enjoy. You've got the sort of stoic, quiet hero. You've got a mysterious woman in danger that he connects with, and there's kind of some crime figures in the background, but done in this very visceral, crisp style, and a lot of intense hyper violence at points. But I really love this director. I think this is his best film, though, of the ones I've seen. And I think that Ryan Gosling does a great job with very little dialogue, but manages to convey a lot just through his actions and his motion. A lot of great cinematography and editing here. The opening driving chase sequence is really good, in addition to a lot of the other performances. And I think Ron Perlman and Albert Brooks, of all people, are really great as the gangsters. I just really love the intensity and simplicity of the film. And this is another one that stylistically, it's like if I could try to make movies like this, I would. I really love. I love that sort of dynamic of the lone hero. Either kind, you can play along with a lot of themes of heroic ideas and sort of gray elements about morality. There's just a lot of good themes you can explore there, and I just love how visceral it is. It's a great movie. Really love Drive. Need to watch it again. Good film. Yes. Then that goes into number 35, which is Finding Forrester from 2000. I believe Drive was 2011. Usually do the listings of the year here, but Finding Forrester is 2000. Finding Forrester, for those of you that don't know, is probably best known for the old meme of Sean Connery saying, "You're the man now, dog." Kind of doing some kind of I guess the implication is more of an urban vernacular, but um, it's a great movie, a great kind of character-driven, quiet drama. Also coming of age, you've got this young, you got this young kid growing up. I believe it's in the Bronx, and young African American student, and he's kind of trying to kind of get by on, I think, a basketball scholarship, but his grades are kind of iffy, but he actually does have a lot of talent with writing. And he has meets this old reclusive author, happens to be Sean Connery, that people haven't seen. He wrote this one book many years ago that was like considered, one of the greatest novels of the 20th century, great American novel or whatever. And but he disappeared. He's like, no one knew what happened to him. He's reclusive, barely ever leaves his apartment. He's just hiding out. He connects with this guy, finds out who he is, and they connect over writing, and then eventually just through kind of life experiences and their feelings about family and dealing with people and relationships in the future. And really, it's just one of those movies of people of two very different generations and backgrounds, but connecting first over this sort of love of the written word, and Sean Connery, Forrester, kind of helping the young man with his writing and his expression and improving that, but also kind of helping him sort of reconnect with humanity and sort of deal with his past, because he's got a lot of anxieties and the phobias about kind of going out and dealing with people, and which is one of the reasons why he kind of doesn't connect with people, because I guess he's got a lot of guilt. But yeah, there's also a really good, I think it's F. Murray Abrams, this snide like professor or teacher at a private school, because the kid goes there and is just kind of thinking, well, there's no way that this kid from this background, this black kid essentially, could write this well. He's got to be cheating. Like, it's just very classist, little racist, but just this very interesting villain. He's like antagonistic in a very realistic way. It's a very snobby, upper class white guy, just can't believe it, who's also kind of a fan of the author. So just their bond's really good, and it's kind of a movie that it's one of those ones that I realized I was connected to in ways I didn't realize, because I love storytelling and just writing, the written word, communication, and it's a movie about writing and really just the act of it and improving it, but how it's connected to just kind of chronicling your experience. And I just love the simplicity of the story. It's very, very heartfelt, and I just love there's a really great scene with the bicycle. It's very powerful, even though it's very simple, and that's just kind of the whole movie. So it's a really good drama. And You're the Man Now, Dog is pretty good. I really like it when I think my favorite quote in the movie is when he says, "First draft, write with the heart, and then you write with the head." And I also when he tells him to punch the keys, because he has him writing on an old typewriter. Please do it, So get in the groove, basically. So they make a movie about writing pretty good, which is actually hard to do for some reason. But that's Finding Forrester. Switching gears again, number 34 is 1 Hour Photo from 2002. Robin Williams' brief stint into thrillers. He had a couple of them in a row, and this was one of them, where he plays a gentleman who works at a photo developing section of like a grocery store or something like that. And really, it's just a very kind of very slow-paced, slow burn, atmospheric thriller, dark drama, very kind of like Hitchcockian almost. You've just got this guy who's a bit reclusive, and it's kind of very interesting because it kind of goes against your typical thriller ideas, where it's like the guy's this really evil monster, but we see it from his perspective, and he seems innocent enough because he doesn't seem like too violent, but he's just kind of creepy. He's really into photos and photography, and he kind of develops this bond with a family that comes in and get their photos developed, and kind of starts in his mind almost like thinking like he's another member of the family. And it just seems like it's kind of creepy and believable in a certain way. Like, it's sad, and it's like the kind of person that you just sort of hope you won't end up being, just kind of like really sort of by osmosis trying to kind of live somebody else's life, even though you're just kind of an acquaintance, and you almost get delusional. But he gets so invested that he finds out that the husband's cheating on the wife and is like breaking up this perfect family, and he gets so angry about it that he basically decides to kind of take matters into his own hands. And that's all I really say. There's a little Evangelion reference in here, which I didn't know about until later. I was like, oh, that's an interesting little reference. But really, just in terms of once again, the photography, well shot film, well edited, which makes sense for the theme. Very good use of color, framing, and Robin Williams gives one of his best, if not his best, performances in this movie. He's so you feel heartbroken for the guy, sympathetic towards him, seems very believable, but also just kind of disturbing and creepy. But it never quite goes where you think it's going to go. It's like it teases a lot of these ideas, but it seems very, very believable in that sense. But really good performance from him, and great soundtrack with a lot of ambient and electronic stuff. Really like it. Very, very good thriller from Robin Williams. So definitely check it out if you haven't seen it. Like a lot of good thrillers like that. Shifting gears a little tonally, we got number 33 for Renaissance Man. I think it's 93 or 94. Renaissance Man is one of those movies that is, I feel like one of those little gems that only I like or maybe appreciate. I think it's underseen, kind of like Hero. I think Hero has got a slightly better known reputation, but Renaissance Man, one of those little offbeat sort of comedies that's also kind of from the heart. But I don't know if it was a marketing issue, but a lot of people didn't see it. Some people that saw it didn't really like it. I don't know if they were expecting, but I always really enjoyed the movie. I think it's pretty good. It's Danny DeVito, one of my favorite actors, doing his kind of shtick, being sort of a smart aleck guy. I kind of tend to like a lot of those characters. I don't think I'm really a smart aleck a lot myself, but I feel like it's a lot of the stuff that I'm thinking in the back of my head is one of those characters that he's sort of represented by. And I want to say that's definitely Danny DeVito here. He's basically this guy. He's like an advertising executive or something who's made a fair amount of money. He's doing pretty well, but then he loses his job. He gets unemployed for the first time in his life and doesn't know what to do. So he ends up getting a little stint teaching at an army base, teaching these cadets who are kind of really struggling, and it's just kind of decided, hey, they don't know exactly what help they need, so they're kind of in almost like a sort of what do you call it, help them. It's a little vague, but they're like, okay, well, you can try to help them get focused or something because they're struggling with their training. So kind of an interesting premise, and he doesn't know what to teach them. And these kids, one of them, Mark Wahlberg, his first movie, actually, probably the thing this movie's best known for, they're kind of really unfocused and don't really know where to start either. So he's basically teaching his first class to a bunch of students that aren't, necessarily the strongest students. And he decides, well, I'm going to teach them a little bit about language, and talks to them a little bit about Shakespeare. They showed some interest, and then they learn about Hamlet, and they study it and start acting it out. And through his study of Shakespeare and Hamlet specifically, he kind of ignites a passion and a bonding that helps improve these students' kind of confidence in themselves and their training and his bonding with them. And it's just a fun kind of heartwarming story that is at the center of learning about language and storytelling and how important that is and how we kind of bond over that. And I thought it was funny with a lot of DeVito's fun one-liners, which I still quote a lot to this day. So yeah, Renaissance Man is a good movie. I appreciate its commentary and its story and a lot of its humor. So check it out if you feel like giving it a go. I think if you're a DeVito fan, you'll at least get something out of it. But it's something that I think had a lot of kind of hints at my interest later on in life. So another one I watched growing up that I didn't realize I liked it for the reasons I did until, in fact, I did. So after that, we've got number 32. 1998's the year, I'm telling you. The Mask of Zorro. That breath got some anticipation there for you. Yeah, The Mask of Zorro. It's one of those ones that I was like, I don't know if I can't not put it on the list because, very simply, it's just another good action adventure, very wholesome, kind of like an old pulp hero, superhero kind of movie. Obviously, an inspiration for Batman was Zorro, and a swashbuckling, kind of like Monte Cristo. It's also a revenge story, and you've got My favorite Antonio Banderas performance is young Zorro, but you've also got the older Zorro. It's kind of a passing of the torch with a classic mentor figure. This is, obviously my classic adventure story with Anthony Hopkins, who I think does a great job. You've got lovely Catherine Zeta-Jones. You've got a lot of history there with the expansion out west after the war with Mexico and some of the issues in California and some of the political strife that's going on there with Zorro as a pulp figure. But it just feels very old Hollywood, very. It goes to some dark places, but it's for the most part rather wholesome. But there's some fun stuff, some humor, a lot of great sword fighting and classic stunts, practical, done with very little CGI, very little. I don't know if there was any. Um, just a lot of great chemistry from everybody here. Some great dialogue. Love the training sequences. I love the romance with Jones is really good, and really just everything comes together so well in this movie. And I also another reason why I liked it is it's one of those movies that I saw in the theaters as a kid and just loved it. Like it was one of the great theatrical experiences. You had a lot of people there that were really into it, and I just remembered like this is coming to the movies, and I just really really loved it. It just really kind of connected with me as a movie theater experience. If they ever re-release it or you get a chance to see a showing of it at a theater or on your big screen TV, I think it definitely deserves the theater treatment. It's one of those films that I say, go for it. Feels like that classic old Hollywood, almost like the Errol Flynn Robin Hood, just really up there. So yeah, Mask of Zorro. That's pretty much all I have to say about it. But just a great, solid action movie. Really, no real issues with it that I could think of. It's really, really can connect to the characters, and that's great. Number 31 is The Untouchables from 1987. Just man, De Palma, man, what a filmmaker. You talk about editing. You talk about your sets and your shooting locations and great stunts and a lot of great gunplay. Probably one of the best Tommy gun uses for movies. Costume design with everybody in their pinstripe suits and their top hats. Once again, a gangster film. I really love the. I love how this film looks. Like you're watching a movie, but it's once again so crisp, so clear, but it holds up so well. It's one of those ones that feels rather timeless. Like I can't quite tell movie. You just can't tell right away. You got great performances. Also, one of the few movies I like that's sort of a crime thriller drama where it's the good guys, Elliot Ness, going up against the bad guys trying to take down the gangsters. But once again, I like the history of that and also the Hollywoodized nature of that. I mean, Kevin Costner does a great job. Sean Connery does a great job. Andy Garcia makes a return. Robert De Niro does a good job as Al Capone. There's a lot of great iconic scenes that are so good they've been parodied on The Simpsons, which is always a good sign. I love, man, the gunfight on the Canadian border is great. The murders of some of the Untouchables are great as well. The syncing of the music with the beats when there's the chase between Elliot Ness and Frank Nitti on the courthouse, which did not happen, with the great gunfight, dun 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 dun, like the slow building, and then there's the pause when somebody disappears and you can't find out where the guy is pursuing. That it comes up, dun dun dun. So just great syncing of editing for the shots and correlation with the music is just really good here. And of course, the iconic scene with the carriage and the gunfight slow down when they're going after the accountant in the train station. It's just every frame a painting. Once again, just great filmmaking. Once again, feels very old school, but very visceral at the same time. Very intense. Just a really good adventure with gunplay, and I like the history of it, and the characters feel like great old-fashioned Hollywood heroes, but also very believable at the same time. And we also have some outrageous gunfights that seem brutal at the same time. So it's got a little bit of everything, actually. All right. Number 30 is Akira, the first anime, I believe, listed on this list, the first anime film from 1988. This was a film that I discussed, on Joe Love Movies. On Joe Loves Movies, I did a little retrospective about it. I believe it was the first one that I did a while back with some funky audio, so I might have to do another one at some point. But I could always talk about Akira. Man, I mean, Akira, I had to get some anime films on here. I think that there's something about Akira that just has a little bit of everything I like in it. I mean, of course, it's science fiction. It's got kind of a dystopian cyberpunk element to it. It's a lot of there's some over the top elements of superhero versus supervillain stuff. Of course, there's with a lot of fantastical anime. You've got superpowers and you've got genetic manipulation and giant laser guns and mutations at the climax, but a lot of it's just kind of like, once again, this low, menacing atmosphere, a lot of haunting, echoing, people chanting in the soundtrack combined with some electronics, but also a lot of heavy percussion. And, of course, exploring more aspects about human nature and kind of cautionary stuff about our advancement and what it would mean if somebody who got great power before they were ready to deal with it. Also, the connection between the two young boys is kind of at the center of the story, and they're feeling kind of stepped upon by the powers that be and kind of lashing out, but in two different ways. But they're also very dynamic. Also, just a lot of great visuals that make it seem like a very lived-in society that's definitely gone through a lot. So it's got that very 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 classic cyberpunk vibe to it. I think it's one of the great cyberpunk films, right there with Blade Runner and Ghost in the Shell. And I always just kind of like that stuff, with technology sort of so infused into different elements of our society in ways that we might not realize, but in ways that's very obvious. I mean, as far as I know, we don't have these biker gangs or people in general just riding bikes that have the great light zooming effect kind of behind them, but it's another great visual. So just in terms of great animation as well, just seeing a lot of that done before there was really a lot of computer technology, I just think it's another great testament to wonderful animation that I think that Japan has brought us, and I think is an inspiration to a lot of other people. So Akira just has a lot going on, and great stuff thematically. Really, it's very me. It's a little weird, but dealing with a lot of big stuff, but still trying to kind of keep it grounded. I think it's one of those films that sometimes a lot of these movies that people think are weird and they don't get, I felt like I kind of got it. And not to sound pompous or anything, but I was like, I got it. This one of those ones that I did, though. The Ghost of the Shell took me a couple times to really get it, but and like it more. But this one I got. I understand the manga could have it make more sense, and I need to go back and read it to try and flesh it out. But I think it's a good experience in and of itself. I think it's still a classic to watch. But that's Akira. Hard left turn or right turn, depending on your perspective, is definitely a tonal shift. Is My Fair Lady from 1964. I remember there was a guy I was working with that saw me like going through it and listening to some of the songs. He was like, "Joe, you really surprised me, man. It really threw me." And like, yeah, I mean, I like to think I have a diverse list, as people watching might be able to see. But yeah, one of the things that I love is a good musical, and I think the reason for that is just I grew up with it. My mom liked musicals, a lot of the Roger and Hammerstein type stuff, and I don't know if this is them, but there were a couple on that would probably make the list, and I think this was one of the ones that came up there for the classics. And I think once again, in addition to really liking the songs, I like the setting. I like the quaint kind of what is it? Is it sort of is it Elizabethan or Victorian kind of Victorian time? Of like the late 19th, early 20th century. Just that sort of those sort of gentlemanly people. I really love Rex Harrison in this movie, and once again, the movie is kind of about communication and the beauty of language and how it can be transformative, but also how there that whole perception of people based on class. You can't make assumptions because I really like Audrey Hepburn, but this is my favorite movie of hers, and I think she's hilarious in here when she's like she's just so ridiculous as the flower girl. And I think it's just a romance that I really like, because it's one of those ones that you don't think it's going to be that. It's purely, once again, this guy's kind of pompous and he's, kind of rough around the edges, very uptight, won't let anybody in, has a very strict view of things, doesn't seem to have much time in his life for romance, doesn't seem to care, and doesn't think much of this lowly, kind of low-class woman. But he really does transform her into this beauty, but of course the message I think is that there was somebody wonderful there all along. She can just speak a little better now and can dress a little better and knows about etiquette, but she's still the same person, and her sass ultimately kind of gets through, as well as her kind of more a compassionate side to this very uptight man, and kind of gets them to bond. And I think there's kind of another film like that down the list you'll see, but I really like that the two different people kind of coming together, who one guy one person sort of helps the other, and they help each other in different ways. And even though it doesn't seem like it would be a good match thus far initially, but also once again, just great performances from them, great chemistry, a lot of great funny lines. My favorite songs, though, actually come from the songs about her father, who's this kind of what do you call it? A sort of a deadbeat guy that doesn't want to do work, and his songs, particularly one about trying to get out of doing work and his particular philosophy, and then ultimately about getting married, were always kind of funny. Fairly PC, I think, but I think probably some very relatable humor, especially for people as they get older. But I always liked him. He's the more cartoony comic relief. But I like how they see he's also complicated and has his positive and negative traits like everybody in the movie. So yes, I would say that it's a very good movie, and one of my favorite musicals, if not my favorite. So that's My Fair Lady. And number 28, another massive shift again, is 1979's Alien. Yes, Ridley Scott's Alien. Man, did a video about this one a little while ago. What a great film. Just once again, you've got a lot of Joe Staples here. You've got really tight, almost claustrophobic, a very lived-in ship with the cables everywhere and cramped spaces. The old 70s looking computers with the big screens and the giant chunky text of just numbers and glowing yellow, kind of ugly, going up on the screen. And you've got things dripping everywhere and steam coming up like it's some kind of, you look like it might be some old steam engine or something. Like, what is this very lived-in ship that just seems like something that could be created with these characters that they seem very believable. Like, we know a lot about them, even though we don't know much about them, mostly because of their reactions to each other. And of course, it's a dark sci-fi horror. It's basically a slasher movie, but creature monster movie in disguise. Like, it seems like it very much is like an old 50s or 60s cheesy monster movie, but just done really, really well with some great practical effects and great costuming and sound design and acting and writing, and some really interesting themes about just kind of dealing with the unknown, and kind of almost like a man against nature, but also to some degree a man against man, and against the evil corporation, who's kind of the actual villain of the movie, and all kinds of subtext about, there's some ideas about, of course, violation and weird sexual imagery and sexual tensions, and also you've got an element of the final girl. I like that with Ripley. You don't really realize she's the main character until the end of the movie, because she's kind of the final girl just by happenstance, but she wasn't the one initially in charge. But one of the great female characters, one of the great action heroes in sci-fi and in general, and Sigourney Weaver. She's really excellent in this, and then later on in Aliens. Of course, if you got to talk about the Alien versus Aliens debate, much like Terminator 2, I think it depends a bit on the day. Ironically, with Terminator, I think I like the second movie more because I watched it more and I really liked a lot of the action with it. Just something about that gravitated for me. But for some reason, with Alien, I always liked the slow burn atmosphere. It just felt more me. I really like how scary it is and how truly alien the monster looks. And the second movie is really good too, but it's a different animal. And I just think this one's one I prefer just a little bit. But yeah, that's Alien. Great movie. If you haven't seen it, check it out. Number 27, we've got another anime making a visit. We've got the one Miyazaki on here, I think. We've got 1997's Princess Mononoke. With Miyazaki, it's always tough to pick. But Mononoke, I think, is just one of those ones I grew up with that was very me because it's dealing a lot with the ideas, a lot of environmental ideas, which are prevalent in a lot of Miyazaki's movies, which I really do care a lot about. The ideas of nature represented by these forest spirits and these giant animals, and I like the myths and these ancient stories. It feels, I'm no expert, but something about it feels very Japanese to me. It feels very naturalistic. I love the music's beautiful. Obviously, I love the animation, but I also, of course, I like the one Miyazaki movie that's really dark and adult and more violent, because most of the other ones are more wholesome and nice. This is like his more intense movie. So that's one reason I was probably attracted to it. It's got interesting ideas about, of course, war and class struggle with the samurai. You've got some interesting, but also though, despite all that, one of the things I like about Miyazaki movies is that it shows that despite the beauty and simplicity in life that you want to kind of try and cherish, that people and circumstances are complicated, and very rarely in his movies is there a strict antagonist. I mean, this one you could say it's the Boers, or Lady Eboshi, or the monk, but they all kind of have their motivations, and they're not strictly evil. You can kind of understand it. And Ashitaka is a hero I really like, and I like of course, that idea of the evil can kind of penetrate anybody and grows from within, and you have to kind of keep yourself in check, and don't let hatred swallow you up, and try to look at other people and other things from another perspective, and see that we're kind of connected, and sometimes have to put our differences aside. I just think there's a lot of very powerful messages in this movie, and I just sort of like that sort of mythological legend status it kind of has, very fantasy based, but also just great visuals because it's Miyazaki. But really good movie. I love Princess Mononoke, and so that's why it's number 27. And let's see. I think number 26 is going to be Jurassic Park. Yes, Jurassic Park is another one that I talked about not that long ago. But Jurassic Park, once again, really good for just, really just because it's, what would you call it? Well, I mean, it's great. It's great special effects. Obviously, with combining the practical, this one holds up. This is how you do it right. You take a little bit of both, and there it is. I mean, it's my go-to example. I think that the effects hold up incredibly to this day. Sometimes I think the CGI looks better than a lot of stuff that's come out in the decades since. So I think it's just another example of Spielberg being a great master of his craft and being able to do so many different things very well. And I mean, I got a lot of great quotes there. I love Sam Neill as Dr. Grant. You got a lot of great quotes there from everybody. I mean, you've got, of course, Jeff Goldblum being great. Really love the dynamics of the characters. I think there's some great sci-fi themes there, but it's just a great sort of monster pick, action adventure pick. It's really good stuff. What can I say? I mean, it's Jurassic Park. I'll pretty much have to go with there. And I think I did type something incorrectly here. So actually, we'll go down a bit on the list, I guess. I'll have to. Oh, actually, got it. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much Jurassic Park. I believe it's number 25. Would it be? I hope I didn't mess this up here. Number 25 is Jackie Brown. Yes, Jackie Brown is one of my favorite Tarantino movies. This is one that I think really is just a great showcase of Tarantino's just being a really good filmmaker, because he, with a lot of Tarantino movies, you get the sense they're really his. And with this movie, it's actually the one movie he did that is an adaptation of somebody else's work, one of his authors that he really likes, I believe. And I just think that Jackie Brown herself is a really great female protagonist. You've got elements of noir there. It's also a little bit of blaxploitation. Kind of brought research into her career, and it's kind of obviously an homage to 70s thrillers like that, and blaxploitation and old crime thrillers. And it's just a really good, solid, well done film. I think it's actually once again kind of a romance that works surprisingly well. And I really like the bail bondsman character. I think he's very likable, and I think. Once again, his romance with Jackie Brown is really good, and I think all the characters, of course, have great dialogue and they're relatable. I also like the any film that's kind of about a suitcase or some money that is changing hands. It's one of those ones that there's a lot of different perspectives and people kind of on this plot, but they're all kind of bumbling. You've got Robert De Niro playing a great character who's kind of a bumbling criminal who's very much against type, and Bridget Fonda's great here as well. But I think one reason why this really stands out as well for me, in addition to I think just oddly being Jackie Brown probably being having some of the most likable protagonists, and you also got Michael Keaton in there in the mix, just a great ensemble. I think that Ordell Roby, Samuel L. Jackson's character, is quite possibly. I think he might be my favorite. I think he might be my favorite Tarantino villain because he's a little underspoken, but he's very evil, but very believable about it at the same time. It's just something I could really see. Um, so I don't know. I love his dialogue exchanges with people. With Jackie are really intense, and I just think it's one of his great performances as well. And there's a lot of great dialogue. I mean, of course, you've got some iconic lines about AK-47. You have to kill every mother effer in the room except no substitutes. So I don't know. It's just a movie that I really connected with because I liked the characters and I liked how, I don't know, in a weird way, it's kind of the most straightforward and nicest of the Tarantino movies. And I like how it's him trying to be very un-Tarantino, but at the same time, it's very pure. It doesn't have a lot of the most over-the-top stuff, but it's such a really good kind of almost restrained Tarantino, which I've always been really impressed by. So I think Jackie Brown's really good. Number 24 is Gangs of New York. Once again, a gangster film from 2002 with Martin Scorsese directing. Great cast of ensemble people. You've got Leonardo DiCaprio doing a great job going up against the great Daniel Day-Lewis as Mr. William Cutting, aka Bill the Butcher, and as in my favorite performance of his, just absolutely fantastic. I actually loved this movie so much that I got the book about which it was based on, which only covered a slight sliver of the book, which was just kind of focusing on like the 1840s gangsters up to the Civil War with the Union shelling New York because of the draft riots, which is just a interesting part of history that doesn't get talked about too much. And yeah, I love that part of history. I love that it feels very genuine with a lot of the old kind of Irish folk song that's dealing with the problems that immigrants kind of had and how the Irish were, kind of suffering a lot of prejudice, which is kind of a consistent theme over the years for immigrants that we still have problems with today. So it's kind of looking at a bunch of different sides of America, how it really is a melting pot, but it hasn't been exactly easy. And I just love how dirty and corrupt New York was back then, and just how well Scorsese constructs all these different sets and uses his cinematography and costumes to really bring it to life. And it feels so otherworldly, but like, wow, this seems like a real recreation of how things were. And it's like, wasn't all elegance on street level. And like, this is what gangs were. Like they considered themselves to be gentlemen. They dressed up in all these wonderful suits, but and they had these big organizations controlling everything, but they really did run things, and they had politicians in their pocket, but they weren't hiding like it was a secret organization. They had these big, giant knife fights of dozens of guys or hundreds of guys out in the streets, just really, really intense stuff. Yeah, I love Gangs of New York. I love the cast here. I think Cameron Diaz does a good job. You got John C. Reilly's good as a corrupt police officer. You've got Brendan Gleeson. That's kind of this gangster turned mercenary turned politician. Just a lot of really good stuff. I think it's probably my favorite Scorsese movie. I love a lot of his stuff, but this one's just combines his love of organized crime with a lot of these really, really epic ideas and scope, which I just think he pulls off really, really well. So yeah, really excellent stuff from that one, and that is Gangs of New York. So we're going to move up to number 23 as we go up the list here. Number 23 is up here because it's another one of those films, and there were a couple on here that didn't quite make the list, but it's for like getting a really strong emotional, experience. It was almost something else. I mean, like just I went there and I really connected with the film, and I loved how it made me feel about movies and storytelling because that's kind of what the movie's about. So much so that I did a whole big video about it in nature for 25 minutes, where half the time I just talked about how nice it was outside. So this is, I believe, the newest film on the list, and that would be Kubo and the Two Strings from Leica. And yes, they've done Coraline and a couple other films. I think, what is it, Paranorman, and maybe a few others, Box Trolls. I think those all them. But they're best known for doing kind of those live action or such, or not live, well, stop motion animation, or combining doing CGI to make it look like it, or both. I debated having the Into the Spider-Verse on here, but I think per Dan's rules, it had to be kind of newer stuff. But yeah, Kubo and the Two Strings, I just loved the pure beauty of this movie. I thought that visually stunning. Just the craft of them putting it together alone like elevated it for me. But I liked a lot of the voice performances, and I liked this very ancient feeling of a simple myth. This character kind of connecting with almost a supernatural element, kind of a family division between the mortal realm and the realm of God. So it's kind of like tapping into this ancient idea about division of family, and but also that his power is kind of based around music and telling of stories, and that kind of the sort of the beauty of human life is kind of the stories we tell and how we connect with each other, and sort of the power and magic of storytelling itself, which is kind of a running theme, as you might see through this list. So yeah, really absolutely love Kubo and the Two Strings a lot. It was my favorite movie for a couple of years there. Really beautiful film, absolutely gorgeous. Just visually, music. It got me to like that George Harrison song, because I'm not the biggest Beatles guy. And I was like, oh, it's your guitar gently weeps. Forget the girl. Who was the lady that did the cover of it? I forget, but her cover of that was great. So just a really good movie. Love it. Recommend it highly. Beautiful, beautiful from Leica. My favorite film of theirs, for sure. Though Coraline is good as well. Number 23, Quentin Tarantino rears his head again with a film that I realized is just a movie that I really like, that I liked more than I thought. I watched it. Sometimes I would just watch it for the heck of it if I had a couple hours to spare. Django Unchained from 2012. Really, really excellent film. I feel like there's always a couple people, if you got to poke fun at something about Tarantino, it's like you're stretching, because he's such a good filmmaker. You gotta try to draw the line to rank them, and I find people are mostly nitpicking. Oh man, Django's too long. Like, not for me. Like, I don't know. It's just one of those things. Like, for me, yeah, it's a long movie. Most of his movies are like 2.5 hours long. He's like all the guys that are trying to be big directors and try to do epics. I mean, I guess you could cut here and there, but I don't know. It's an epic. It's a Western, or more of a Southern. And I just love how he made really one of my favorite Westerns ever. And I mean, Django just is obviously another revenge story that is kind of an allegory for revisionist history. Once again, steeped in, kind of pre-Civil War, this freed slave trying to rescue his bride against a bunch of slaveholders who, as over the top as they are, they're also probably very close to history. And you've got a lot of great costuming and landscape shots, really just kind of creating Candyland, and really Leonardo DiCaprio doing excellent in his portrayal of this really terrible person. Really, but everybody's good here. Jamie Foxx does a great job. Really good soundtrack on Christoph Waltz as the dentist turned bounty hunter. Love that guy. Love their dialogue together. Just really great film. Love the gunplay, over the top violence. Got classic Tarantino, but I love the scope of it. I love the bits of history, and I really delving into ideas about racism and how people really believed about those things. That is something that I think really kind of shines a light on it in a more entertaining way. But there are some pretty intense aspects to that film that definitely can't be ignored. But yes, and I believe that's going to take us to number 21, and that is Dark City from 1998. I think this might be the year for me. Yes, Dark City. Once again, haven't seen it. I think it's one of my favorite sci-fi films. Got some sort of horror elements. Once again, a very neo noir kind of cyberpunk, steampunk elements. Deals a little bit with the ideas about dreams and memory and identity and how they kind of factor into who we are, and are we the sum of things that happen to us, or are the decisions we make, or some combination of both. And I love how I don't want to spoil too much of the movie, although I'll warn you to watch the director's cut, because I mean, I watched the theatrical and I still think it's good, but the you should watch the director's cut, because I mean, all right, this goes to show I like the theatrical, and I didn't really pay attention, because the problem is I think somebody thought cutting this movie that it's a little weird and people aren't going to get it, and maybe they wouldn't right away. But it's a movie to think about. It's more of an experience too. But they literally spoil what's going on right away, like with the opening narration from Kiefer Sutherland. So it's like, just probably go for the director's cut so you don't spoil it. But basically, this guy wakes up and he has no idea who he is, and he wakes up in this very strange city where it seems like it's night all the time. And I kind of want to do a spoiler review of it sometime, because I want to break it down. But basically, it's kind of a precursor inspiration for the Matrix, because it seems like it's night all the time, but the city seems to shift and kind of mold itself differently, and people kind of fall asleep and wake up as different people, and these strange people or creatures or other beings that are just kind of going around messing with things, because they can literally warp the world, and they're just kind of observing people, trying to figure them out. But this guy has lost his memory, doesn't know who he is, but he's aware of everything happening around him. He just has little bits like a photograph and some basic things. And Jennifer Connelly is his kind of strange woman, femme fatale, mysterious woman of the night kind of sort of trope, because this is a noir, but it's a sci-fi noir, and it's really creepy, and a lot of dark shadows and great visuals. And I forget the actor. I want to say it's I'm not going to mess up his name, but I always consider him the Dark City guy. He's really good at this. You've got William Hurt as the detective who's trying to figure things out. Really good movie. It's very creepy, very atmospheric sci-fi, but with noir elements, cyberpunk elements, but dealing with a lot of kind of weighty themes and big sci-fi concepts. So really good movie. Excellent film. I highly recommend it. Moving on, we've got number 20, I believe, and that is, shifting gears, Karate Kid from 1984. Watch this one again. This is just another one that's got a great, mentor and kind of young person connection with Mr. Miyagi, who is one of my favorite characters, one of my favorite mentor characters, and Daniel Caruso. These Pat Morita and Ralph Macchio have great chemistry together, and I love how it's kind of a relatable, situation. I'm sure growing up, everybody has felt to some degree like they were a little bit left out. A lot of kids feel like they're sort of, either they move to a different school like he did, or they just feel kind of picked on and they don't quite fit in, and they got to find some way to make it work and find some balance in their life, which is sort of what this movie preaches. And I think it's got a really good story that's relatable, but some really good, honest life advice that I think you can take with you, but also kind of framed around a kind of 80s and sort of cheesy premise where everything sort of feels kind of grounded, except for the villains, who you're like, what is your problem? Like, what is the motivation? Like, it's only in this 80s movie we got like a karate dojo where they're literally going after this kid and trying to kill him, and their sensei is like, oh man, I'm gonna literally threaten the kid and his master. Like, why? Like, what's this guy's problem? And we find out later when they eventually did the show, but for a long time, you're just like, what's going on here? Johnny Lawrence, it's pretty ridiculous. I mean, I just love how ridiculous it is. I mean, okay, sweep the leg. You got a problem with that? Got the one guy at the tournament telling him to, put him in a body bag, and nobody's like, cool it, man. What? This parents got to talk to this kid. It's just great stuff. It's that contrast between kind of being a little ridiculous at points, but still very grounded and full of a lot of heart. think Pat Morita does a great job, really centering the movie with his performance too. Um, yeah, and Elizabeth Shue is great in this as well. So really good movie, great coming of age story. That's a big family one group watching a lot. Gets from 1997, much like I believe My Fair Lady. You've got kind of an uptight, not very likable guy who's a writer, who Jack Nicholson, I mean, he does a good job in most things. Just does a good job playing this neurotic guy who's, very closed off from people, doesn't like people. He's kind of classist. He's snobby. He's racist. He's uncouth. He's prejudiced. He's like, a miserable, unlikable guy. Has very few redeemable qualities, except I guess he's a good writer. Apparently, ironically, writes romance novels that a bunch of people really like, but has very little trouble. I mean, a lot of trouble connecting with people. And this is a movie about connection with other people, just kind of through happenstance. I mean, he connects with Helen Hunt, the waitress, with the son who, obviously has these health issues, and he kind of develops this romance with her because he does like her, and she sort of takes care of him at the restaurant, and he just admires her. And you just want to think of it as a typical romance, but I guess it's probably my favorite one. But it's also, he develops, of course, the friendship with the dog, and that's kind of who he hates initially and tries to basically throw away and kill, but being forced to take care of the dog after his neighbor gets beaten up. That's like the first step into him sort of becoming a better person. And I love that slow evolution of him finding his humanity, starts loving the dog, and then grows to love the neighbor who's gay, and he's kind of homophobic and doesn't like the neighbor. And then, of course, it was Greg Kinnear does a great job, and Cuba Gooding Jr., who kind of forces it into him. He kind of develops sort of a friendship with him, doesn't like him because he's gay and black, and they sort of bonds with all of them. And I mean, of course, it's got that great lines, great compliment. He's like saying stuff that's kind of mean at the date. And Helen Hunt's like, you just really like hurt my feelings. Like, for you to get me to stay, you got to say something right now. Pay me a compliment. Make it a good one. And he's all like, talks about the pills and his therapy, and like, I never did it. And he's like, after I met you, I started taking the pills. And he's like, and she's like, well, what does that have to do with me? He's like, you make me want to be a better man. That's my Jack Nicholson impression for the evening. She's like, that's the best compliment. That's so beautiful, isn't it? Like, and I think that's a beautiful, just kind of echo of connection and friendship and just romance in general, that I think is just really beautiful. And everybody gives good performances, a lot of great one-liners. Jack Nicholson, of course, is playing that character that I don't really think I'm like, but maybe has a little bit of some of those mean streaks in him. It has a lot of mean one-liners, I guess. But that's a really good film. Love As Good As It Gets. Maybe this is as good as it gets. Shifting again, watched this one recently. Number 18 is Dread from 2012. I do like the 90s one with Stallone, but this one I think is just a really solid, once again, cyberpunk, heavy action movie. You take a kind of simple premise and you have it mostly concentrated around one building, but focus a lot on heavy action, crisp acting, special effects, costumes. Carl Urban does a really good job playing Judge Dredd and saying, I am the law. You believe it. Very stoic meme where he smiles with a harder frown, just a really, really great performance from him. Love his film. I love this film overall. Great direction. Very tight, simple story. Doesn't waste a scene. Very frenetic. Good fun time for just a really good adrenaline pumping action. I think it's one of those films, much like John Wick or maybe another film on this list later on, that is a good example of how action films can be art. And it's just excellent through and through. I loved his relationship with the new judge in training. She's a really good character. I think Lena Headey as Mama is an excellent villain. One of the creepiest, most intimidating gang lords ever. This one has gangsters in it again. I love this movie. Great soundtrack. Just very, very very stylized. Really good. Really good. Elevation of smaller budget, but building it up. So 2012's Dread is really good. Number 17 is being represented by my shirt here, 1954's Gojira or Godzilla, the original Godzilla film. Yeah, anybody that knows Godzilla movies and giant monster kaiju stuff, I kind of once again sort of like the cheesy element of these really kind of obviously fake special effects, but especially as a kid, you don't really care. And I grew up with these movies, and I really kind of played around a lot, pretending to be Godzilla and his different monster companions, and imagining different fights in my head. And I loved a lot of these movies, and kind of as I grew up, still appreciated the unique art form. I think it's kind of like my go-to example of all those cheesy old sci-fi and monster movies where, yeah, it's cheap special effects, but like Doctor Who or Star Trek with those shows, you can have, as long as they have good story and there's a lot of creativity to those special effects, you sometimes can do a good job. And as the movies evolved, they also really explored a lot of really good potential for the effects. They can still be, you can tell they're fake, but you don't care, and you can still get really into it. And that's that movie magic, and that I think you can really fall into with Godzilla films. And the original film, though, is kind of the spark. It represents all that because at the core of it, much like all classic sci-fi and monster movies, you got a great message. It's kind of anti-war, kind of a cautionary tale. You've got, of course, a romance at the head of it with Dr. Serizawa, and kind of man against nature, and Godzilla's kind of just sort of a kind of an after effect of humanity's hubris, and they're experimenting with destructive forces of nuclear power, and of course creating just a big fun monster. And I just love, like as a kid, this movie scared me, and I think the black and white helps with it because just the way the monster moves slowly, and they do a really good job with his teeth and the fangs, and he really does seem like this almost like big blob of darkness against the landscape, and you've got the fire coming up and the explosions and the music, the dun da da da. You've got this really great soundtrack and people screaming in terror, and all these big explosions, and the obviously got the low angle shots to really make Godzilla seem imposing, and the use of shadow, and I think the black and white kind of helps with the cinematography to really kind of help with the framing and force perspective to make Godzilla really seem much bigger and imposing. And it's still incredibly effective to this day. I think it's a very unsettling movie if you let yourself kind of get into it. And it's very tragic, as in kind of an anti-war sort of cautionary tale, and just a great monster movie with a great kind of tragic ending. So I think it's a beautiful movie, and Godzilla has a big impact on my life and love of special effects and just filmmaking in general. So, yeah, and I would recommend watching the original Japanese version, though I grew up with the American cut and it still got the job done. So I still would recommend getting the genuine Japanese one if you can. All right, moving right along here, we've got number 16 with 1991's Silence of the Lambs. I've talked about this one at length with Dan recently, as well as talking about it with my old podcast, The Film Fanatics. So if you want to search, you can find discussions with Dan and Justin over there with them. But Silence of the Lambs is just a great thriller, incredibly well done, well edited, well shot, great music. Jodie Foster, love her, great actress, does a really good job as Clarice Starling. I think she's a great female protagonist, great protagonist in general, great detective story, mystery. Anthony Hopkins, great lines, great actor, steals the scenes with the few he has. Really great chemistry with Jodie Foster. Um, Buffalo Bill, disturbing villain, really creepy, great performance there. Just everything about this is powerful. It's visceral. Just I really, you feel like you're there and you're kind of in these dark, murky places, but you really want to see the woman get saved and for Clarice to prove herself and make it, but also to get out of it alive. And I love how, of course, Hannibal is charming. You can check out our reviews of the show over on Dan's channel. He's got the one-liners, but he's a kind of really great, lovable villain. And just a really well-written character study, great thriller. From a pure filmmaking standpoint, it's just impeccably put together. It's like a perfect movie. It's just one of those. Silence of the Lambs, so good. That's all I'll say about it. I've talked about it a lot, but love Silence of the Lambs. Number 15, Had to pick one, otherwise there'd be a bunch more on this list that would be kind of more repetitive. Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country from 1991. For a long time, I don't know why, this one was just my favorite of the Star Trek movies, particularly of the original cast. I'm not entirely sure why. I think it's because it's sort of them at the end of their careers, the end of their lives, being very reflective, and it feels like a good send off. It's also it has a lot for Spock's development. He's kind of the detective in this one because it's a murder mystery, which is something that Star Trek hadn't really done before, at least not really in the movies. And I think it's a pretty darn good one. I think the relationship between the Federation and the Klingons and trying to kind of form a bond is obviously echoing the Cold War, and the undiscovered country is dealing with and even people are resistant to change that could potentially be better, and learning more about other people and interacting with them and bringing them into their society. Because in a weird way, even if they're used to being at war and hating people, it's sometimes easier to kind of be stuck in that mentality because maybe you don't know if you can handle the future, or you're not going to be capable for it. This is your time, and you're used to being in kind of a warlike atmosphere. So I don't know. Just really impeccable. I think everybody's good in here. Everybody's got something to do. I also just really love Kirk and Bones together. Their conversations when they're on the prison planet and their kind of escape. I think there's some really good moments there. A lot of great lines. I think Christopher Plummer is easily one of my favorite Star Trek villains, is General Chang. I love the Klingons in this movie. I love the political thriller. I love the trial. Just a lot of good scenes, a lot of great insight. That's kind of a culmination of the arcs for the characters in this movie, especially Kirk. I think Shatner does a great job here as well. I don't know if it's better than Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, which is probably still the best movie. But Undiscovered Country is definitely a runner-up. It's easily one of the best, and it's my personal favorite. Just got a lot of fun things there. I like the mystery thriller and political aspects to it. So yeah, Star Trek 6. Number 14 is my favorite Batman movie, Batman Returns from 1992, the second, I was going to say Danny Elfman, but Tim Burton movie. Both are correct. Yeah, man, love Batman Returns. I mean, this is a one that's very me. And once again, don't know if it's better than the first Michael Keaton Batman movie, 89. I think it's right up there with it. This one is definitely much more Burton. It's much more weird, much more dark and gothy and stylized, kooky, much more focus on the villains and making them deranged and even further from the comics. Catwoman and Penguin are quite different. But I still really like the exploration of Michael Keaton's Batman in this one. I think we actually get more exploration of his character than in the first movie, oddly enough, and his relationship with Selena Kyle. I think Michelle Pfeiffer, of course, does an excellent job as this really damaged, borderline psychotic person that also kind of wants to get revenge on the boss, the evil Max Schreck. Christopher Walken, who plays great kooky villain. Really, the main villain of the movie is a made-up one. And I think there's just a lot of really good explorations of character through the performances and the writing, but also the music and sets, costumes, really fun camera movements that Burton likes. You got that sweeping one through the old zoo. Christmas is kind of the holiday theme in this one. Gotham seems very cold, and there's a kind of like a sinister, kind of that creepy cheer that Burton brings to a lot of his movies is there. A Penguin, I mean, Danny DeVito proves his mastery of craft. I mean, I really think honestly this is one of his best, probably his best performance, because he's done a lot with drama and thrillers and certainly with comedy, but he transforms with the makeup in this and becomes this demented monstrous creature that, at least for me, I mean, it's such great acting and maybe writing, because with the Penguin, he's so deranged, and they made a villain that tries to kill, tries to poison and drown children, right? And still kind of made at least me feel kind of sorry for him at the end. Like, he kind of gets a tragic send off, and I'm like, only a great writer and filmmaker could do that. And I think that says a lot about the exploration of the characters. But Batman's great here. The romance with Catwoman's the best I've seen so far, and it's just that stylistic nature and just everything about the movie from an atmospheric standpoint, filmmaking, but also just sort of a connection to the characters. I love Michael Keaton's Batman. I really do. He seems so offbeat, but like in a weird way, it'd be believable that somebody like him could be Batman. Um, yeah. So that is Batman Returns. My number 13 is the Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring from 2001. Once again, I had to pick one. If I could put all the Lord of the Rings in the trilogy, I would, of course. But this one's always been my favorite. I think the Lord of the Rings movies are, of course, if we're talking about, once again, just great storytelling, great filmmaking, that we could be taken seriously because it was so impeccably done. It's actually just a real miracle that the movie was done and through a lot of hard work and payoff and just everything just coming together so well and still holds up extremely well for the most part. Really great film. And the first movie, I guess I just like the gathering of the characters. I tend to like beginnings or endings. And I like the coming together and the sort of classic adventure, almost like the classic D&D group of you've got this group of characters going together to go and achieve a goal, and they're all different, and you've got this very lived-in old fantasy world that still feels like it has themes that are relevant today, and so many great lines, great set pieces, costumes, characters. I love Lord of the Rings. Music's great, Gandalf's great, Ian McKellen's great, Sean Bean's great. I mean, Lord of the Rings is fantastic. I mean, I think I don't have to explain why, but I love fantasy. Though I will say that um, I tried to get into the books for a while, and I'd watched the Ralph Bakshi cartoon, but it was the movies, Peter Jackson's films, that really sold me and made me a true Lord of the Rings fan. So I think it's very enduring just to his. And there are some things about the films that I really like better than the books. So I love it, pure filmmaking, and I really admire Peter Jackson a lot just for being able to take you to another world and imbue you with that magic is just a really great talent. And Lord of the Rings gives me one of those experiences. Moving on to number 12, we got a similar sort of theme here. Had to pick one movie, so I can't say the entire original Star Wars trilogy, though that is sort of the slot here as well. 1983's Return of the Jedi. Fully will admit that New Hope or original Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back are probably better movies. I think I could say that safely, but I don't really care because for me, though those are better movies, and I can admit that, Return of the Jedi has always been my favorite, still my favorite, mostly because the Ewoks never bothered me. And I will admit, yes, you could argue that like some of the things aren't as fun for other characters to do that are left over. That's true. But I like all the stuff on Endor. I think the opening scenes with Jabba are great. But really, Return of the Jedi is good because it's the culmination of Luke's journey, and I love Luke Skywalker. And I love his relationship with his father and the culmination there and the kind of bringing him back to the good side. Basically, even though the movie has some flaws, the scenes that take place with the Emperor, who I love, by the way, always quote him in your pathetic attempts to destroy me with your insolent rebel fleet. I quote the guy all the time. Like, I love Emperor Palpatine, great, cheesy, straight up evil, one dimensional, evil dark wizard guy. Of course, I love him. So I can't not have him in here. But in all seriousness, though, those scenes that take place in the Emperor's throne room between him and Luke and Vader, that fight has so much emotion. The sweeping music, all the little cuts, so all the little motions of like the lightsabers and the temptation and the dynamic between father and son, like all the stuff that's going on there, the internal struggle and the struggle between those couple characters, echoing the battle on the moon. It's just great stuff. Those are my favorite Star Wars scenes, like by far. So it's like the pure goodness of acting and just everything from an emotional standpoint in those films is so powerful. Like I love when Luke's hiding and then he comes out of the dark and he's like, no, when he threatens the sister and just like hacking with his green lightsaber. Just looks so beautiful. Just love that raw emotion there. Just taps into something that I just can feel. I guess maybe growing up with my sister and who knows, all kinds of complicated feelings about family. I mean, it's Star Wars, so it's got some universal things that transcend the generations, I guess we can all relate to. Classic stuff, just in space with laser swords. So Return of the Jedi, love it. great movie. Personal favorite Star Wars movie. Okay, and moving on to number 11 is coming to. No, actually, no. I think it's coming to. Another Disney film, another Disney Renaissance film. You might remember Mulan started this list, but number 11 for me is 1996's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Love this movie. Obviously, of the Disney films, this is my favorite. And this is another one of those where I'm like, if you want to say technically speaking, are there other Disney movies that may be better? Probably. I mean, I showed some people to it. I showed some people it a couple of years ago, and the one criticism I've heard about the movie is that, ironically, the biggest detriment is the fact that it is a kids movie, and it kind of like is held back and could sabotage it, and maybe shouldn't have been a kids movie because it was that marketed. So, and I think this is the beginning of maybe when Disney kind of tried to experiment. After Pocahontas, they decided, which had some issues, they did this, and they focused on the most blatantly dark subject matter, dealing with issues of religion and faith and corruption therein, and racism and lust and sexuality and deformity and other kinds of prejudice and isolation and genocide and the cities being burnt to flame, and all these things. And it's like, yeah, like, I don't disagree, but as a kid, I was into it, and I think that, yes, you could argue maybe it wasn't too bold for a kids movie. Sure, context, but now that everybody knows that, years and years later, looking at it as a film by itself that mostly retroactively adults watch now, it's a very good movie. Just happens to be a good animated movie with a lot of films with a lot of great adult themes, and I think you got some good music. You got the best Disney villain song. Claude Frollo is my favorite Disney villain. Great performance from him. Just a very realistic villain, probably the most complicated one, so gets a lot of points up. But Quasimodo is a great sympathetic character that I'm sure a lot of people could relate to, feeling like an outcast. I think the sort of unrequited kind of romance with Esmeralda is there, but I think she's a great character. Phoebus is great. Kevin Kline, Demi Moore, I think is Esmeralda. I do think that Jason Alexander and the other gargoyles might conflict with the tone sometimes. They're like the only real kiddie thing in the movie, but they're funny. They've got some adult humor too. So I don't know. I think retroactively, it's certainly a movie much more for adults, but it's a very good movie. It deals with some intense themes and some really powerful moments. The artwork, designing the cathedral is just beautiful. Some really good song numbers there too, and just really great, ambitious film from Disney, which maybe has some flaws, but I think the flaws kind of also make it great. So yeah, that's Hunchback. Now, coming into the number 10, spoiled it a little bit, but talked about this recently on a podcast, but one of my favorite comedies is Coming to America from 1988. Probably my favorite Eddie Murphy movie. Talked about this one at length with Dan not too long ago, but just a lot of great quotes growing up with the family watching it. A lot of funny moments, great story, great performances. It's just extremely rewatchable and holds up pretty well. Sequel wasn't too bad. Really great ensemble. Not much too much you can say about it. If you want to check out my other thoughts, check out my podcast I did a little while ago with Dan. Just a really funny movie. Also, number 9 is a 1988 movie as well. Twins, great comedy. Danny DeVito again with Arnold Schwarzenegger. They just have a really good dichotomy with the simple premise of the contrast between the twins that are very much opposites. But I like their bond, and I like that there's a lot of heart to the movie because it's about these two people. One guy is not just externally perfect, but he's a really good person, very naive, innocent, very good guy, very nice, very noble, the best of humanity. Whereas Danny DeVito is, of course, not only short and balding, he's kind of course, Danny DeVito, who's very rough around the edges, kind of a crook, con man, thief, not a very nice guy, very selfish. But they bond and they kind of learn from the best aspects of each other, united to find their common past, their mother, and find out they have more in common. I also like their love interest. I love how this is the mark of a very good movie because I never understood, but I think a lot of people don't like this one, but I think it's got some really great comedic timing, very simple, but it's really their chemistry their bond that I like, and also the fact that this movie balances a lot of genres. Like, it is a comedy, but it's also an adventure movie. It's also got elements of romance, but it's also kind of a thriller because there's the whole, once again, missing suitcase trope, and there's kind of there's some gangsters, and there's a kind of a mysterious assassin guy who I really like, and the whole last act kind of ends with like a chase scene that's really intense. So the movie balances tone and different genres very well, which I think is tough for any script to do. So Twins, I think, is a great movie, very wholesome, good story that I grew up watching with my family, was a go-to. Love Twins. Hope they get a sequel someday. Number 8 is another comedy, perhaps the best Star Trek movie, 1999's Galaxy Quest. Not the whale one, though that is another great one. Galaxy Quest, I think, is one of, if not the band, sci-fi tropes, fandom, old sci-fi shows that have and sci-fi tropes, but Star Trek in particular, very much a love letter, but a lot of good special effects, great acting, incredibly sharp writing, great chemistry. I think that without this cast, it wouldn't work well. Tim Allen does one of his best performances as well. I think that he really does kind of pull off that sort of Shatner-esque guy, as well as, I mean, you got a lot of the greats: Sigourney Weaver, Alan Rickman, Sam Rockwell in an early role. You got Peter Shalhoub, and you got I think some other people are there as well. A lot of really good people in this film, doing excellent work, and I love how, once again, there's a lot of good comedy, but it's not only reverent for the shows that it's poking fun of in the fandom, but it's showing why those things are good. And in and of itself, it's a good sci-fi movie with a lot of good heart, with kind of good message about just kind of sort of accepting who you are and kind of leaning into the best parts of you and that sort of thing. So it's a good adventure, and Galaxy Quest is a really, really good movie that I think, as a Star Trek fan, it's definitely tailored to me, but I know Tim mentioned it on his list. I think that it's good enough that even if you're not a fan of Star Trek specifically, you'd really like the movie. It's a good one. Number 7. I'm going to cheat a little bit on this one because I think I'm allowed to. It's a bit of a debate, but Tarantino's back once again with Kill Bill. I'm going to say volumes 1 and 2. I'd pick volume 2 just for the story if people wanted me to, but I consider them one movie because he wanted them released as one movie, and that's pretty much typically how it's considered. Kill Bill, I think, is just pure Tarantino, or at least what I like. It's homage to old movies, in this case, old thrillers, old martial arts and samurai movies, a bit of westerns, a lot of great frenetic shots, editing. I love the structure of the story. I love a good revenge tale. I love the incredible stylized nature of it. Everybody does a good job. Uma Thurman's really great. I love her as a great female protagonist. I love Bill. I love the other assassins. Of course, the showdown at the club is really good with all the fighting, the sword fights, and great stunt work. I love the Pai Mei training. Just everything about this is clearly like, taking a look at these old films he loved and amping them up and just kind of putting them on display. And I love the energy to it. I love the otherworldly, powerful elements of filmmaking therein. And I just love everything about Kill Bill. I think it's fun. I watched it not too long ago, and I think it holds up really well. It's just something I can put on anytime, and I love the experience of watching it. And number 6, the last one for the day, is going to be 1984's Dune. Probably one of the more divisive films on the list, but this is one that's definitely a cult movie. It's one that is very much a love it or hate it. You either are behind it or you're not. I know that it didn't do very well when it was released, but over time, it's had a lot of reevaluation, and it's appreciated much more, and it's found a lot more love. I think it's I'm one of those strange people that it's one of those ones where I think I've talked about it before. Dune's it's sort of in my DNA because I've been told that my parents, when they met, they both, I think my dad grew up reading the books and was a fan of the movie kind of partially because of that. And my mom was familiar with it. And this was one that they would quote, and they would quote to each other just for fun growing up before I was born and even around then. So it was just one that I was exposed to along with Star Trek and Star Wars as kind of a big sci-fi. And I think just growing up with it, I sort of just picked up on a lot of the themes, and I don't know, the weirdness just sort of clicked for me, and I never was particularly confused by it. I got the basics of the story, and it was just so weird and unique, and I really think there's no other movie like it. And I know that they're finally planning to do another one, which Denis Villeneuve, I think he's the man for the job, and I hope that movie's good. But I think this one will still always have a place in my heart. Kind of got me interested in the books and in the world of Dune in general, and I wouldn't be a fan of it without it. And also, just such a big fan of David Lynch because I liked this movie long before I knew who David Lynch was, and then later on I discovered his films, and a lot of them were some of my favorites. None made this list, but like I said, there could be some reevaluations at some point because I've got plenty of other honorable mentions, and like I said, if I rewatch some other things, there could be some other ones. But yeah, yeah, the epic scope, and I think Kyle MacLachlan's great. He got a big ensemble cast, very unique sci-fi, interesting technology, also kind of just big ideas about transformation and destiny, and once again revenge. And it's got like that old school idea of just like clashing houses, so it's almost feudal and fantastical. I love how evil the villains are and how demented they are. A lot of the weird dream imagery. I love, of course, the classic idea of the hero rising up to free people. And I don't know, it's a very unique sci-fi film that's very me, and I like a lot of the ideas it's kind of suggesting, and it's just a really cool experience, and it feels like you're there, and I really like that. It's also just a really good discussion piece and something to make fun of and to drink to, and it's not dull, which I think is one of the great high points of a movie. So Dune, I really love. Very unique costume design, sets, effects, and great over the top performances. A lot of quotable lines. I grew up with it. So Dune is great, and that's going to be the cutoff for my list today. A couple honorable mentions I might talk about later, but there were some that didn't quite make the cut. Like I was thinking Toy Story 1, maybe 3. Father of the Bride was almost there. Little Miss Sunshine. West Side Story was mentioned recently, but I got to watch it again. So a lot of great movies that I danced around, but I wanted to kind of keep this list as was. Made it months ago, and I'm sticking with it. But like I said, you know how it is. Watch the movies, reevaluate it, be flexible. Though the top 10 and the top 5 are up there. So Dune was like dancing around the top 5. I even thought it might even reach it because I talk about it so much. But I think that I think my top 5 is still pretty solid. So hopefully I'll talk about that some other time. And yeah, so that's going to be that. It's kind of dark now. There may be another big potential Zoom, maybe where I talk to other people. We get together and all share our top 5s. If not, I might do it myself. But hopefully we'll get to do that. And I also have a bunch of other movies I kind of wanted to list off. But see, even without somebody here, I was still able to get over 2 hours. So I told you I had something to talk about. All right, everybody. Well, if you were watching or listening up to this point, thank you very much. Those are some of my favorite movies. And let me know if any of yours were there. You want to let me know or tell me some of yours. That would be great. And I'll keep the other favorite movies of mine secret for the time being. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching, listening, and stay magical.